To address during his State of the Nation address this week is the feasibility of basic income grant for South Africa. The 350 Rand social relief of distress grant is set to expire at the end of March, and calls have been growing for an alternative. Now, let's discuss this further. We're now joined via Zoom by Isabel Fry, who is the founding director of the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute. A very good afternoon to you, Isabel. Thanks very much for being with us here on SABC News.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Flo. And I just want to say before we begin that I was at the parade that was many years ago when former President Mandela had his first address. So it is a very, very special day.
Yeah. Let's start by talking about the fact that, last year's State of the Nation address, President Cyril Ramaphosa focused on four main points. Of course, it was COVID-19, vaccinations, but I want to specifically look at the issue of job creation. We're talking about social grants, and we wouldn't necessarily be talking about social grants, would we, had the issue of job creation been addressed? So are we sitting on a promise that wasn't fulfilled and now having to talk about social grants?
I think we need to recognize that the conversation starts in the Constitution. And in fact, in 1996, when the final Constitution was adopted, that gave to everybody the right to social security. The fact that that right hasn't been realized for the majority of working age people who find themselves out of a job is the issue that is to be addressed. I think the issue of COVID itself raised for the state the first time the possibility, the feasibility and the desirability and the need to extend social grants to working age people. And so we got the 350 social relief of distress grant. We do need to be very mindful of the scale of the problem flow with regards to joblessness. So not only do many people not have decent jobs, but we also have an official number of 11 million people not unemployed. We have a total of 22 million adults who are not in employment or training, and neither employed nor unemployed. So we know that the majority of people who are alienated from the job market, from the labor market itself, have been so alienated and marginalized that the pathways into jobs are critical. And it's for that reason that many people, such as my researchers in my institute, have said, let's look at it from the other way around. Let's invert it. Instead of saying, how do we get people into jobs and therefore earn income? The question is, how do we give income into the hands of people who can then act as economic agents and through demand support each other in terms of growing small and micro businesses? I've just been reading an article which comes from the US that advocates basic income as a way of basically stimulating and supporting the innovation and micro-entrepreneurial class that globally we need to take us out of the economic doldrums.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we are hearing that the 350 social relief grant is to expire at the end of March. A lot of people, of course, not ready for that, and indeed there are calls for an alternative, and one wonders what that alternative would be. And if we're looking on the side of government, whether it is feasible to continue with the 350 Rand grant for prolonged period of time. I mean, where is government when it comes to this issue of the 350 Rand grant? No doubt that those who are receiving would want it to continue, and in fact, I've even heard some saying it should be increased. Where do you stand on this, and where do you think government is with this issue? So,
I mean, essentially, what our research has been trying to understand is how do we make South Africa work better? How do we solve for poverty and inequality? Now, we know that on January 18th, 15 million people had applied for the social relief of distress, 350 Rand. So you've got to ask yourself, why is it, to what extent are people in such destitution that they would go through the process of applying for 350? There is no alternative currently on the table that would absorb and give and reach out to these people. We've also seen the fact that the report recently released from the security cluster around the July 2021 violence shows the impact of poverty and inequality in that, and the sense that people feel completely alienated from any state involvement. So we're asking people to respect the rule of law, But people who are so far marginalized don't see the fact that they get any benefit in response to that respect. So there's a very complex conundrum on the rule of law.
Yeah, and how much would you say? Sorry, just to come in here, but you can finish off along with this answer to this question. But how much would you say would be a good sort of a basic income grant? Civil society groups and unions are calling for an amount of no less than 1,500 rand a month, which is quite steep, quite reasonable, and I suppose people would be happy to hear that. But where do you think they should rather be gauging?
The work that we modeled looked at 3 levels of a basic income grant to be phased in over 3 years, linked to the food poverty line of 625 Rand in year 1, the lower bound poverty line of 830 Rand, and then the upper bound poverty line of 1,335 Rand. And that would be sufficient to actually shock the economy into economic growth of between 5 and 7% per annum, as well as looking at creating between 3.7 and 4.1 million jobs. That's the extent and the scale that we need. I also think that it's really important that we call for a reinvestigation into the macroeconomic framework, because from the econometric work that we've done, it's very clear that the fiscal policy that we're currently pursuing is basically narrowing down any further investment, and we're not expanding monetary policy in the way that other countries such as the US and others have done. So instead, inflation is basically strangling any further growth. We need to look far more creatively at our macroeconomic policy, because we're a developing country. We've got more than half our population who are living in poverty on a daily basis. We won't grow the economy, we won't meet people's needs, and we won't have a hopeful future unless we do.
Yeah, and I mean, some might even argue that, South Africa has enough grants as it is, and while we're pouring more into social security, you've kind of answered that in that a lot of people, of course, are unemployed. But is there a way, perhaps, that all this money that's going into social security could be redirected into something that would make it more feasible, more of an investment? And I think I'm going back then to the question of job creation.
So job creation itself is not something that happens overnight. And I think if you look at the presidential jobs program that's coming through, there are a lot of good initiatives that are happening. However, what we're saying is, again, look at it the other way around. If you give people a blanket security of income, start looking at the micro linkages. So if you want to grow people who are making bread in townships, if you want to grow skills such as plumbing and that, all those essential skills, you base those on an integrated labor market social security policy. So that if I go and say that I want to register for a social grant, I get a skills assessment done. My skills are then linked to the necessary training skills or programs that are there. And also, once I'm graduated, I'm put into a database so that where there is requirement from the private sector for someone with those skills, I link in. It's not rocket science. It's been done really well in many other countries with sort of commensurate, comparable challenges and development such as we have. We just haven't done it, and we've worked in silos. Yeah. Grants should not be seen as welfare. They should be seen as enabling, and they also are the only way that we can get our nation working together.
All right, Isabel, thanks very much for joining us here on SABC News. We certainly do appreciate your time. All right, that is Isabel Fry, the founding director of Study